So, who out there is ready for a little bit of learning? Video games have had a typical price point of $60, and until recently, that was the norm. But what would happen if, instead of more expensive, games were actually sold much cheaper? Can video game companies make more money in revenue by selling more copies of a game at a lower cost? Stick around as I go through the sources, information, some of the knowledge, and other issues that may crop up when trying to reach this lower price point that I'm discussing. And some of it depends on you. To start with, let's go over the information. This whole thing started when I had it pop in my head randomly one day that years ago a friend of mine told me the video game Unreal Tournament 3 supposedly sold more copies in one weekend during a Steam sale than it did during the entire life of the game before then. Now, I searched around to make sure if this little nugget of useless information was correct, and it turns out not really. There was, however, a 2,000% increase in players during the time it was on sale. No information on how much it sold or money it made. The article led to another one, though, that held something more interesting. According to Steam themselves, sale prices did lead to increases in sales. They had a 3,000% increase in sales for Left 4 Dead during a sale, and an unnamed third-party game managed to get a stupidly incredible 36,000% increase in sales. The data Gabe Newell shared shows that on average, a game on sale at 75% gets an increase of almost 1,500% in sales. So with that information, we're left wondering how much profit that makes for them. Let's look back at that $60 price tag real quick. I'll get into some of the more details about why games cost $60, but for now, keep this in mind. According to IGN, game publishers typically make around $14 per game sold. Now, keep in mind there's a lot of generalizations and educated guesses made with articles like this and what I'll be discussing. Companies aren't very open and clear with, their books and accounting and things like that, and some of that's for legitimate reasons. I'm sure some of you might have heard about corporate espionage and things like that. However, there are other articles I've seen that say that the number for the profit is $27 and not $14. For the purposes of the thought experiment in this video, we're going to go with the lower number, but any of the math I'm talking about could easily replace the $14 with the $27. Okay, gotta jump in here real quick. You probably noticed that I misinterpreted the article, and the actual profit number is $16 and not $14. I'll continue using the wrong value of $14 throughout the video, because you'll soon see how this oversight still works. But in short, the current business environment for video games has changed over the last 5 or 10 years, and raw game sale profit is not as important as it used to be anymore. Data for game sales is still important to be used, but you'll see how that all ties together later in the video. I will add notes through the video about how the math differs if you use $16 instead of $14 though, but feel free to try your own numbers in these equations as well, as long as the profit value does not go over the cost of the game. And I also haven't gotten much information about how much the companies and the developers make on video game sales during these sales. That's probably going to be the biggest if and but surrounding this entire video. Either the publisher gets a percentage of the original profit, so in the case of a 75% price drop, it would be 75% of $14, or they eat the loss of profit and hope the increased sales mean more people buy DLC or microtransactions in the in-game store. If it's the latter, then they make money from the sale, since 60% of video game money was made from microtransactions in 2021, and it's presumably gone up since then. meaning most of the money didn't come from the game itself being bought anyway. And keep in mind, how many digital in-game purchases or add-ons, microtransactions, how many of those come pretty close or even equal the price of the game itself? Most of the time, however, they're cheaper, making it more of an incentive for you to purchase the costume, colors, whatever is available, because, it's cheap. It's a nice little impulse buy. Take a couple dollars, take 99 cents, whatever. It's not the $15, $60 of the game. And there's something else about that 60% thing that I'll get into during the conclusion segment of the video. But for now, let's revisit that first scenario. Let's go with 75% price cut, since that gives the best results. 1,500% increase in sales. 75% of a $60 game would be $15, or close to the price of an indie game like Undertale or Five Nights at Freddy's. 75% out of the original $14 profit means the company is left with $3.50 profit per game sold. Meaning, if this is how the profit is evenly cut with the price, for every one game sold with $14 profit, they would instead sell 15 games at a $3.50 profit, or $52.50 total profit. Now, an even split down the cost of the game getting to the store isn't actually realistic. I mean, the post office isn't going to give a 75% discount on shipping and handling because you're holding a sale. But let's say it's an even dollar after other expenses are covered. They still make more because 15 sales makes $15 in profit. $1 more than the current $14. Now, I'm leaving out a lot of business stuff behind the scenes about how that might be too slim of a profit margin to risk it, but if it were a popular game like the Left 4 Dead example, that would double the profit to $30 for each batch of 30 games sold at $1 profit. And of course, this assumes there's going to be an equivalent exchange of, for every one game they sell at $60, they would sell 15 to 30 games otherwise. And it's here that some of the buts and ifs are going to start coming into play. For starters, $60 is the expected industry standard. This is not unusual. It's generally an agreed upon thing between the companies to make the market fair and balanced for everybody, to have an even playing field. You'll notice things like sodas, cereals, plenty of other stuff out there has a in the same ballpark kind of thing, if not exact same prices. In the days of cartridges, this price point was pretty much settled on because a cartridge was effectively a computer board in a plastic shell. They weren't cheap to manufacture or program for. See the price of RAM sticks today to get an idea. The expense of the storage medium kind of ended with the movements to CD, then DVD, and ultimately Blu-ray and digital nowadays. Now, even with the idea of developer costs going up, this is something that would still give us the idea that at least the cost of putting it on the physical media has been dropping over time. However, the other aspect of this is it's not just the businesses that are used to the $60 price tag, it's us, the customer. I mean, what's your reaction to the term bargain bin? You're walking around, you look in at Walmart or whatever, and there they are, stacked up in a pile, $20 each, and you're saying to yourself, well, what? Either these are bad games or these are old games. It's that association with quality to the price of the game that might influence how we react to seeing games starting to come out at $15. Two things can happen in this situation where they take their $60 games, they start selling them for $15. It might work out because when you see it, $15 is nice and cheap. That's a pretty good impulse buy. I mean, you heard from plenty of everybody else that the game was good, or maybe it's just there and you want to try it out, but hey, $15 is a lot different from the $60 price tag or even the $70 one they're trying to push on us now. $60 or $70, after all, is not something you might have handy in your pocket at the time. And let's think about the fact that if the game's $60, you're probably saying to yourself, okay, well, I'll wait to get it. A couple weeks go by, you get your next paycheck, you go in the store, there's the next new game for $60, and you go for the newer one and skip over the other one that you wanted. But the thing is, all this data about increased sales is based off of sales, not regular prices. So, of course, there might be an increase in sales because people see it and they're like, oh, well, it's not going to be $15 again for a while, I better get it now. fear of missing out, right? If games were released at $15 instead of $60, would you skip over it expecting there to be more sales for that price? And I'm going to say right here, if they do drop them to $15 with everything I'm going to talk about this in this video, there probably won't be many sales, or at least big ones, like the 75% off. However, I mean, you see it for $15, you think there's going to be another sale, so you pass on again, waiting for the sale to come on, just like it was $60. And let me tell the story of JCPenney to illustrate that. One day, JCPenney decided that to help their business, they would end coupons and sales and just put everything at a steady, everyday low price. This actually wound up damaging the company more. At the time, I was told through hearsay the reason was because people just couldn't get over the habit of JCPenney having sales and coupons, so they just kept ignoring the new regular low prices in the expectation there would still be sales or coupons. This routine that us customers were used to played against them. Would it play against game companies if they dropped prices to a new normal price range? That's actually hard to predict, but I'll explain now why I think that might not be the case, or most likely will not be the case. After all, if the price of a game being too cheap means people wouldn't want to play it, then that means stuff like Fortnite and Genshin Impact wouldn't have a player base because can't get cheaper than free. And I'll get into the microtransaction thing later, but for now, just think of the fact that because the games were cheap, it was easier for people with curiosity about the games to get into them, especially with stuff like Undertale and Minecraft, which took off like rockets generally. And let's be honest, a AAA game coming out would sell more because, well, it's a lot more economically accessible at $15 versus GTA coming out for $70. It boils down to, why was it such a good deal that the Steam Summer Sale had a game for 75% off drop down to $15? It's because you're used to seeing the $60 and you're not used to seeing the $15. And you are ready to spend the $15 versus the $60. And I'll probably repeat this point later, but somebody asked me, if this is all true, how come the companies don't know this? They probably do know it, and that's why the DLC and in-game microtransactions and add-ons are $10 or $15. I actually think the typical price these days is $15, if not $25. They know you like buying the cheaper stuff, so they make it cheaper so it's more accessible to you after you have it shown to you. And JCPenney has the issue of, we're suggesting the idea, people were thinking maybe they'd have sales again or something. But there's also the fact that JCPenney isn't technically selling anything too different from people like Kohl's, Nordstrom, Walmart, Target, and TJ Maxx, half the other things you can see out there. The pair of pants and shirt you get from JCPenney is effectively going to be worn the same way as the pants and shirt you get from anywhere else. And we'll be using the shirt analogy a little bit later in a surprising way. Stay tuned. That said, there's only one Grand Theft Auto. There's only one Diablo. And even then, there's a different GTA or Diablo in the games that come out. There's a different GTA 1, 2, 3, nearly all of them different. Nearly all of them play differently and are unique to each other. You can't get them anywhere else, is what I'm saying. These are unique products you're getting. Sure, you got Saints Row and you got Grim Dawn to, compare to GTA and Diablo respectively. But like I said, those are still different. They'll play differently. Different people who made them. Different presentation. Different. But speaking of the stores, here's something else to keep in mind. And this is going to be one of the biggest hurdles that will probably be one of the biggest changes to the market if they go through with it. In order for these big box stores to want to sell games at $15 prices, like I'm suggesting, they would need to be able to make that same kind of profit the game companies are making, or have a equivalent increase in revenue. The problem with that is they're physical copies that they're selling. Even the digital code's just hanging on the hook, you know what I mean? So in order for them to get the 15 to 30 times increase in sales, they would have to have 15 to 30 times the stock they have of the game. And you can go in the store right now. The shelves are not empty. They do have some they don't sell, which means they would also have, with this whole equivalent increase in everything, a 15 to 30 times increase in overstock or unsold product. Well, they could just, get more truck deliveries, right? Well, those deliveries cut into their bottom line. Get rid of things from the shelf so that they can make room to put the stuff on the shelf. Well, that's going to anger whatever company's trying to sell the stuff they got rid of. They might lose profit out of that too. Even the game company telling them they need to drop the price would require a contract negotiation or risk damaging the contract that they already have with them, and again, angering or damaging the relationship the two parties have in this case, making it harder for either one of them to want to do business with the other. And to bring the point up again that some of you might have noticed I didn't make clear yet, this sales data that I'm using is based off of digital sales. For a digital sale, the profit might increase substantially from the $14 since there's no shipping or warehouses or giving a brick and mortar store their cut. Yes, platforms like Steam take a 30% cut, but we don't know how much the publisher is making before or after that, or how much they didn't spend on making and shipping the physical copies. And we all know the publishers are trying to make their own digital platforms as well. Does that mean maybe they can only make the digital games $15 and the store games stay at $60 or $50? The stores would have to be insane to accept that occurring. They have contractual negotiations about the games, which includes the prices. When the digital games undercut them so severely, that's not just going to anger them. I think that might actually be a contract in bad faith. The price difference would be so severe that it would be incentivizing the customers to go to the digital storefront instead of the brick and mortar store. Again, this is also probably why the digital games remain at $60 versus the cost in the store, even though it's cheaper to produce them digitally because, well, if they make it cheaper, same situation. Even if it's just 5 cents, the stores might throw a conniption. In the end, between all this, a $15 price point might just be too slim of a profit margin, and, well, the contracts might just be too much to deal with as well. So brick and mortar stores might just give up on video games entirely. And I have seen this before. If you know the store Boscov's, they used to have things like a photo shop and video games and music and movies, but eventually those got taken away and put away. And that just might be the example of them saying, we can't afford it, we don't make enough money off it, we're just going to skip the whole thing altogether. But remember, the focus of this video is how the game companies can make increased profit off of these sales. The brick and mortar stores selling them might be a necessary casualty for this to happen. Which brings me to one last topic to get into before we delve into conclusions. Let's say we stick with the $60 price tag because they need that money from the sales of it to operate effectively. It's not surprising to say that the profits from the major hits can keep them afloat when they release their stinkers. We've all noticed inflation in these times, and, well, I guess it's just time now for $70 to come up because Take-Two needs that money to keep the lights on, right? Right? Things must be getting more expensive, so let's see what they have to say to convince us why we should pay an extra $10 and... We're not seeing a pushback to it. I'll translate the corporate speak. We are getting away with it. You companies need to give us better reasons than you're used to it or you'll pay it anyway. as a reason for price increases. I know that your end user license agreements don't say that we actually own the game. We just own a license to play the game. And every last one of you can see this easily yourselves. If I have a license to play the game, why can't I play it on more than one platform or console? I don't go to Walmart, buy a t-shirt, and then get a contract that says I can only wear it on Tuesdays and Thursdays after all. Well, the dev team had to make separate versions. Did they have to make those separate versions from the ground up, from nothing, 3 or 4 times? And shouldn't that make the PC copy of the game double or more in price because they have to make sure that it's tested and workable on different GPU or CPU chipsets and technologies? Oh, what about that inflation thing I said? Well, if you blame inflation, you are openly stating that you know the economic status of everybody is in a worse place than it was before, meaning they have less free money to go around. So with that in mind, did they do anything to keep overhead costs low while they were still making everything? Well, we gotta make sure the workers get paid too, right? I mean, they're still working on patches and DLC. There's plenty I can get into about that topic, but I'll leave that alone and just focus on this. When you get more revenue from more games being sold, regardless of the price they're at, that's more revenue and money to pay the workers for. After all, Domino's and plenty of other places have their buy two at cheaper price deals, and they know people do that regularly now, more than just buying one pizza or whatever. They wouldn't be able to keep that up if they weren't making an increased profit from selling those two cheaper than at the normal price. Anyway, that's my 2 cents about the price increases, so let's see how things can go with price decreases. In short, there are a lot of things that have to happen and be generally guaranteed to happen for game prices to be lowered, even if it's not $15, and then have them stay consistent at those prices. So here's the rundown of things that would have to happen. First, game purchases would pretty much have to give up on stores and go completely digital. Then there would have to be enough people willing to spend that $15, and even an increased number of people willing to spend that $15. That's not too much of a stretch for me, though. And all of this would have to happen regularly, and that is especially weighted on the customer's actions, i.e. you, from seeing games consistently at $15 at a lower price in a digital-only environment. Remember, that 1,500% is an average. How many percentiles of that average are lower than or higher than the average? That said, let's revisit that 60% thing. Not all games have in-game or DLC purchases, microtransactions, stuff like that. However, all of this is going to definitely incentivize people who haven't done it before, companies that are on the fence about it, companies that don't do it too much, or companies that are already in very, very deep about this kind of thing with making and developing DLC, in-game app purchases, microtransactions, stuff like that. I mean, they're going to have to do that to ensure they keep getting their profits above what they were getting previously when they drop the games down to $15. But here's where the math and statistics of all this actually get a little bit interesting. Because you're probably suspecting that the 75% price drop would apply to the 60% as well. How many times have you gotten, let's say, Assassin's Creed Origins or something from the bargain bin for $20? Go home, put it in, there's the DLC in an in-app purchases page, and everything in there didn't get cheaper. All of it priced like it just got released yesterday. How many games on sale have their DLC pages on Steam or wherever show that they don't get the same markdown price, if any at all? That 60% is most likely going to continue at a consistent rate similar to what it is today. And by that I mean if we apply the $14 profit from a $60 game to that 60%, it means the 60% equals $21 in their revenue, making a total of $35 in revenue for each game sold. Now that's applying the entire company-wide revenue to each individual game. Some of us don't buy the in-game stuff, but this is to help illustrate and compare it all. Drop the price to $15 and the 40% revenue that made up becomes $3.50, or as I mentioned previously, we can make it as low as $1. The $21 for the rest of the revenue per $60 game sold will not change in most instances for the reasons I just pointed out. Now maybe some of the other stuff gets lowered in price, like the DLC packs, the expansions, big stuff like that. But you know what somebody who spent $15 on a game compared to $60 has? An extra $45 to use on in-game purchases, or even another game he came out with. So I think that $20 revenue value will stay generally consistent. So let's apply the value of that 60% to the increased amount of sales. With the averages being 1,500% to 3,000%, especially closer to the 3,000 for more popular or heavily advertised games, that means that for those increases in sales, the people who get in-game purchases and such would increase that revenue value to $315 for 1,500% increase in sales, and $630 for a 3,000% increase in sales. That means, to compare fully, the sale of one game at $60 gives a total revenue to the company of $35 each. When that turns into 15 games sold at $15 for every one game sold at $60, these 15 games make a revenue of $330 to $367.50 per 1,500% increase in game sales, which isn't a 1,500% increase in revenue, it's a 942% to 1,050% increase in revenue. For 3,000% sales increases, double, it would be 1,885% to 2,100% increase. And there's where one thing comes in that might cause companies to not want to do this, comparing this to the increase in revenue if they can get these increased sales somehow for a $60 game. Do the math, and that means the units of 15 or 30 copies they'd sell at $15 instead of the one game at $60 means those units of 15 or 30 make between 62 to 70% of the revenue that the $60 game would make if it sold an equal number of copies. If. However, that would mean that a game that sells 1 million copies at current prices would have to sell the 15 or 30 million copies that our $15 games would theoretically sell. And let's remember, there is a limit to the number of people that actually want or are interested in a certain game, even if it were nice and cheap. Overwatch has 50 million copies sold, and GTA 5 is 175 million copies sold. Minecraft and Tetris are actually at the top of the bestsellers list with 238 million and then 520 million respectively. But remember what those games are? Cheap! Tetris more so because of age, but you get what I mean. And remember the big if. These increases in sales are only happening when the game is $15, not the $60. So they might look at it and say, our calculations say we're only going to make 67 to 70% of the revenue compared to if they stayed $60. And they got marketing teams to push for those increased sales for the $60. But the revenue that they don't make at $60 can't be compared to the revenue they possibly and most likely would make at $15. Also, there's the question of if they even need to make this 1,500% threshold to make the increased revenue versus their $60 game. What is the minimum number of $15 games they would need to sell to make increased revenue, keeping the consistency of the $21 spread across each game sale, and just to really push things, Instead of making $1 profit from actual game sales, they break even and eat the costs and make $0. How many would they have to sell to get above the $35 revenue per game if they just made that $21? Well, elementary school math says 2. If $15 games only double sales, they'd still make an increased overall revenue of $42. A 120% increase in revenue brought on by doubled sales that only came about from the cheaper price. Bring back in the $1 or $3.50 and it becomes $44 or $49, which is an increased revenue of 126% or 140%. If you want to get really specific with how few games they can do, an overall 170% increase in sales, or times 1.7, is slightly above the break-even point for revenue. As you can see, this is where the profit value for each game sale becomes mostly irrelevant, and it didn't matter if the profits were $14, $16, $27, or even if they somehow keep all of the $60 or $70 from the price of the game when it sells. In fact, here's the evidence that 170% increase in sales still works, even if they keep all of the $60 or $70 that the game costs as their profit. As I said, the current market landscape has changed from what it was about 5 or 10 years ago, and that change is effectively microtransactions and other in-game, in-app purchases, which have become a much more consistent and profitable source of revenue, as was shown with the 60% value of revenue coming from such sales. Now, this also leads to the conclusion that not only is the profit from selling a game arbitrary in terms of the percentage of the total revenue and how it all interacts, but also that within the boundaries of what we discussed in the video so far, game companies have no true need to make games cost $70. So if the price is arbitrary, why not make the games free? I keep suggesting $15 for the games so that there's some kind of profit that the companies can make. In turn, that means that they wouldn't have to lean so much into microtransactions and DLC stuff as if they just gave the game away for free. Let's face it, we all have our suspicions, if not evidence and knowledge, of how a game focused entirely on microtransactions can damage the quality of it. So this is my conclusion about the whole thing. If we as the customer accept that there will most likely no longer be any future purchases of video games in physical stores or on physical media, although I hope they'll still let us back them up, there will be an increased incentive for in-game app purchases, or at least more aggressive marketing of it, and that we, importantly, do not change our buying habits and our perception toward the games with their cost being $15, then it is theoretically possible, based off the information and research I've done, and I'd say some of the stuff they taught me in business class, but when you get taught the things, it sounds more like common sense that you just never thought of before. And I will say at this point in time that I am aware, and I am always aware, especially in business, that there are things that I couldn't figure out from my research, I just plain don't know, and hey, might have gotten some stuff wrong. So if you or anybody else that hears about this video thinks I got something wrong or missed something, didn't think of something, go ahead and put it in the comments. I'm not going to be somebody who says I'm 110% right just because I did a bunch of hard work researching. This is, like I mentioned before, a thought experiment. I'm not entirely sure how realistic all of this is going to be, especially since it's such a huge change to how the industry and us, the customers, have done things so far for decades. That said, the comments you leave about the stuff I missed or got wrong, whatever, yeah, I won't mind replying to them to see if how it changed things, what kind of other ideas it gave me, how it's making me, put it into all this stuff I came up with, and see how it changes. This is probably the most important aspect of this video, where this might just be a thought experiment, and I might not know how correct it is, but for all we know, there might be something here to find out. And it's only by putting all our heads together and sharing our information, knowledge, experiences, that we're going to be able to come up with maybe not the perfect solution, but a better solution. Maybe $15 isn't what we can do, but maybe we can do $20. Or, maybe we can figure out a way to keep the $60 stable instead of them trying to pull the wool over our eyes about the $70 thing. And on that note, I will point out that a lot of times I keep hearing people talk about video games being expensive and why the prices are going up and why they don't like it. It always seems to be people complaining about corporate greed, and yes, I will point out that from my business textbooks, I can show where CEOs in a lot of instances are being overpaid, either by accident, by purpose, whatever, but that's not the focus of this. Running around saying evil business, evil CEO is not going to get them to change their minds easily. Showing them how they can make more money doing things cheaper and selling them cheaper is going to get them to change their mind easily. And while it might be as difficult as I say and suggest, it might not actually be that hard. The funny thing about businesses, especially here in the US, is they're effectively the only time that you will get a quick and emphatic yes as an answer to the question, if everybody else ran and jumped off a bridge, would you go with them? That's because businesses have a tendency to follow the leader a lot, especially when it seems like an easy thing to do. Just look at what happened with the whole NFT thing, how many people try to get on that. They got into microtransactions pretty fast, but hey, who here remembers that time they tried selling 3D glasses and 3D TVs? They're afraid those other businesses jumping off the bridge might know something they don't. And so before the bean counters can come up with a risk assessment to tell them about all the rocks in the water, the CEO's already jumped off, hoping to find that big pile of fluffy marshmallows that the others must know is down there. And again, that's where we have to come in on this. If we don't buy the games at $15 and show them that business strategy is going to work out for them, and yes, this sort of suggests that we will have to buy a few of the costumes, in-game items, and things like that for the games, then they're either not going to even bother doing it, or they're going to very swiftly go back to $60, probably even snapping back the $15 games to $60 that they tried out. We have to be the ones that prove the big pile of fluffy marshmallows is down there when they take the flying leap, and okay, look, this analogy is starting to break down. I'm here talking about CEOs jumping off bridges, and I'm sure all of you are happy to hear that, but I think this needs to be slowed down a little bit and moved on from. I think you all know what I'm trying to get at with all this, and hopefully it's not too confusing, but most importantly, hopefully it's not too far off the mark, so that together we can actually build off of this or come up with a different idea to show all those CEOs and game companies that, yes, not only do we want this, but we're willing to reward them for it, in a sense. Just to be clear, this video is made because you guys voted for it in the comments, and we're going to make sure to continue that going forward. You guys watch this stuff, you guys should have a hand in what you see. And if I am completely wrong with all this stuff, then, hey, let's share the knowledge together, you know? To reiterate something I pointed out in my Sonic Origins video, these college textbooks up here, all used. None of them came from the actual college bookstore for the $300 or $400 they wanted to sell them for. Those came from Amazon. You look up the ISBN number, and there they are, used. That's going to cost you, if not the same, less than all these $60 and $70 games are. So if you're thinking about just wanting to get some more knowledge and information or whatever, why not get some on whatever topic you want and learn a little bit more about whatever topic you want. Teachers and other educators sold separately as part of the actual college classes bundle. Rich family legacy admissions included in the select purchases.